All right, welcome to this episode of Sour and Salty. We're going to be talking about Munchausen by Proxy. A couple of things before we dive in. As always, this podcast is not a replacement for mental health therapy, treatment, any of the such. And a little bit of more of a warning for this episode specifically, but we're going to be talking about the subject matter is pretty heavy. It's kind of disturbing. There's children involved, there's child abuse. So just a warning that do something nice for yourself after listening to this, even though it's really interesting and really important to talk about, it's also really hard to talk about. So I thought I would go ahead and start us off with the DSM-5 definition of Munchausen's, which is actually known so the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's how therapists, psychologists, use that to diagnose. And in the DSM-5, it's actually called Factitious disorder. I don't remember if you remember, Nicole, but whenever we first talked about doing this episode, I had to look up what it was actually called because I was like, Munchausen's isn't in the DSM-5.
Yeah.
So it is actually Factitious disorder.
Right. And as I was doing research, I saw that there's actually a problem by calling it Munchausen by proxy. But I couldn't really understand what was the problem.
I don't know. I didn't see anything
with
like
the
that.
name.
Is it named after someone? Like, is Munchausen someone? Okay.
Yeah, it's named after someone, and I think they gave it that name around the 1940s, 50s. But I don't know if it's because of the person or what.
Yeah. So maybe it's kind of a hard name to, I mean, it's like naming a mental disorder after a person, I guess, is kind of, you don't usually see that. I did know that even in the DSM-5, so there's factitious disorder, which is yourself, like you are showcasing yourself as like having an illness or an injury or whatever for attention. And then there's also, so whenever we're talking about Munchausen's by proxy, that's technically referred to as factitious disorder imposed on another. It used to be called factitious disorder by proxy. I think that, and they stated it a few different times in the DSM-5, making it super clear who the diagnosis goes to. Because I think that you can kind of think Munchausen's by proxy, maybe it's like referring to the person who is like the victim of the mental illness, as in like whoever this illness is supposed to be, or whoever's illness this belongs to, versus the person who is making up all of the lies and fabricating the illnesses and fabricating the injuries. So the person who is falsifying basically all of these medical or psychological signs and symptoms, that's the person who's diagnosed with factitious disorder, or Munchausen's by proxy also. And then some other symptoms of it are just that they appear as ill or impaired or injured. The deceptive behavior is evident even in the absence of obvious external rewards, which I thought was interesting, just because, I mean, even reading through some of these cases, you don't really understand what they're getting out of it. I think in some cases I can kind of see where they're getting stuff, but then in the other ones, like there's one I'm going to talk about that I don't understand any external reward that they were getting. And just also that it's not better explained by another mental disorder, such as like delusional disorder or some kind of psychotic disorders, because it's not that the person actually believes that there is an illness in this person. Does that make sense? Because I think in delusional disorder, you might actually think that they're sick and you're trying to help them.
Yeah, like they know that person doesn't have it. They're most of the time they're causing symptoms to act as if something's happened, just like you said, so they can get some sort of accolade. But they don't believe this person. Like, for example, with one mother, she was trying to act like her daughter had leukemia, but she knew that she didn't.
Right. And in a lot of the cases, so I feel like we're probably going to refer a lot to like the parent and the child, because that's the kind of the relationships we see a lot in this. I don't know if they all found that same thing, but for me, that's what I saw, I guess, the most. And so in those cases, it is the parents usually are giving the child something to be like presenting these symptoms, or kind of messing with lab results or anything to present these symptoms, or to falsify those medical records. So that's just a little backstory, I guess, on what the actual diagnosis is. Does any of that surprise y'all, shock y'all? Pretty much line up with what you thought?
Yeah, it's kind of what I saw. There was, and of course now I'm drawing a huge blank. I remember thinking, because I had heard of the term Munchausen by proxy, but I guess there's actually also just like Munchausen syndrome, where it's like, I guess you like do it to yourself. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I read that had me confused with, like hypochondria. Like then that started me being like, that's a little too confusing. But I feel like Munchausen syndrome by proxy made sense. But once it was like within the self, I was like, this is getting a little too, it was jumbled for me.
Right. No, that makes sense. And of course, I can't remember what hypochondria. I think the name of hypochondria is even different too, whenever you're talking about the actual diagnosis of it, but I can't remember what it is now.
Hypochondria is like that you just have like this abnormal anxiety about your health. Like you think like you have a headache, but you think you go on WebMD and it could be a million other more serious things.
Right. And I think in the DSM-5, it is listed as like illness, anxiety or something. Like it's not, it used to be called hypochondriaism. I can't remember, but it is. So I think what the difference with that one is, you do believe that you are sick. Like you really do believe that something is wrong with you, versus if you have Munchausen's, AKA factitious disorder, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. And maybe you're creating symptoms or signs of something so you can kind of get that attention or whatever external reward. Did y'all ever watch that Grey's Anatomy episode whenever someone had Munchausen's? That's what comes to my mind. Basically, it was like this woman, she was one of the patients, and she her parents had been missionaries in a foreign country, and so she'd been like raised in foreign countries, and she had been really sick whenever she was younger. And then she got better, but I think that she kind of got used to like how nice it was to have medical attention. And so she was taking pills to like give herself like heart arrhythmias, and no one could figure out what it was until Christina figured out that she had Munchausen's.
I'm like scanning 12, 13 seasons.
Right. It's on the earlier side. So scan like the first like 3 or 4 and you'll find it. First 3 probably.
I don't remember that one for some reason.
Because it's old.
Yeah.
And because not everyone has watched it a million times like I have, because I have an unhealthy obsession with it. So what cases did y'all find looking into this or other research?
I think the biggest case, whenever you just look it up, like just the most famous cases, the one that keeps appearing is that woman, Dee Dee Blanchard, and her daughter, Gypsy. And especially because of that HBO documentary that I told you about, Mommy, Dead and Dearest, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or is it the other way?
It's Mommy, Dead and Dearest.
Okay, yeah. And then also, I didn't know this, but there was also a movie with like Joey King, I think is her name.
Yes.
I haven't watched the movie, but I did watch the documentary and it's very disturbing.
Is that the Lifetime one? I don't know who Joey King is.
She's young.
I don't really know who she is either. Well, she's actually in Insidious, right? Is that what it's called?
Oh, is she the little girl in Insidious?
Yeah. And I didn't notice that until recently. But
I don't know if I knew that.
He's in that, and then some other
he's
really
in like
famous
Booth or something, right? I never watched it, but I feel like I've heard of that.
This might be the same one. I'm not sure, because there's a Lifetime movie called Love You to Death, which is like about the Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose case.
I think that is it.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, that was the most famous case, I think, or at least the most portrayed in media.
Well, and because we watched the documentary too, and that documentary was disturbing on so many different levels. But I do think that one was probably, I don't know, more like recognized in the media just because of how, well, one, the gruesome end of it, but
right.
two, but also just because like they had gotten like what would it's called? Like
Habitat for Humanity.
Habitat for Humanity houses. They had like gotten awards. They had been on like the news before. I don't know, just like they had really been in the public eye for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd gotten like free trips. I think they got a free trip to Disneyland. That was the thing. The mom really manipulated so many people. And I think that was her gain from it, was like, look at all the stuff I'm getting. Look at all the attention. I'm this like rock star mom doing it on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one was, whenever you watch the documentary, that was one of the ones I really understood. Like, obviously she's getting external rewards in the fame. Oh, gosh, I can't talk. In the area of like recognition and newsworthy events and all of those things. But also I think in her case, I understood like she wanted someone to be dependent on her. Like she wanted to be needed. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to make sure her daughter didn't leave her. You know, I mean, I think that the specific ways that she went about that, I mean, it was like very much impairing Gypsy Rose from being able to leave her. And I mean, she had obviously a really dysfunctional view of love kind of from her own mother. And so I think in her mind, it was like, this is how I keep someone around and this is how like my daughter loves me. And so I could actually kind of make sense of that one in my head. But then I was reading some other cases and I couldn't make sense of it. Yeah. I couldn't understand.
Yeah, it's weird because when you look, or at least I don't know if you guys looked it up, but I'm obviously interested in why this happens. And I think it's interesting that they can't tell you what exactly it is, but they can like speculate that it's probably from history of abuse or like neglect when you're a child, or the loss of a parent very early in age. But in that case, like you mentioned, Dee Dee's mom was also kind of like unhinged. So maybe it's like hereditary or it passes down somehow.
Right.
Anyways, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I do think hereditary is probably a factor in that, just looking kind of at that pattern for them. But it also is, I mean, definitely a pattern of like abuse would make sense to me. I don't know. I just always think that we're so wired to have like connection with other people. And so if we just have that fear of abandonment maybe, and we feel like no one's going to just choose out of their own volition to stay with us, like I have to force them to stay with me somehow, by like even basically disabling my own children just to make her stay with me.
So for this particular case, if our listeners don't know what we're talking about, this woman, Dee Dee Blanchard.
Yeah, they said their name different than I would have pictured.
I know.
I felt the same way.
They also have difficulty with names. Like
that wasn't just you though. It was odd the way they pronounced it. I mean, I'm not going to tell someone how to pronounce their last name, but
it's not how different.
It
looks. Anyways, with this particular woman, she, ever since Gypsy was a baby, I think she started saying that she had all these medical conditions. And so I think the biggest one was she said that she had leukemia, right? And then at some point, and so what she would do was she would shave her own daughter's head to make people believe that it was real. And then at some point, she also said that she had like muscle dystrophy. Is that how you say it? Muscular dystrophy. And so she said that from like the hips down, she couldn't, she was like paralyzed. And so she needed to be put in a wheelchair. But, and even in the documentary, if you guys watch it, which I recommend, if you want to end up disturbed for the rest of the day.
I was going to say it was pretty disturbing, but also good.
I know. Me and Caesar watched it, and after we just like kept looking at each other like, oh my God, what?
Right. I think I texted you and I was like, so she's supposed to get out of prison soon.
I know. And I'm actually afraid.
You're right. I hope that she's had therapy.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine. That's a whole other.
Right. I know. Yeah. I think that there was even, go ahead, Jess.
Oh, I was just going to say the level of the manipulation with the mom. Cause yeah, like with the leukemia thing, like, cause Gypsy even said like, she didn't realize she didn't have all these problems. Like she said that she knew she can walk, but everything else, like she was kind of convinced like, yeah, I am sick. And like with her mom shaving her head, yeah, she had told Gypsy like, your hair is going to fall out anyways. Like, let's just shave it now. Like just kind of piling on excuses. And that's the thing with a lot of these, usually it's children. They don't know that there's not a problem with them.
Right. I mean, think about she was like 2 or 3 whenever it started? I can't remember. She was young
I think
whenever it started.
Even she was a newborn. The dad said something along those lines.
So, I mean, just think like you're a child, like you don't understand what any of that is, right? Like you don't understand what health is. You don't understand what sickness is. You just know that like this is the norm for you. And so it's so twisted because it's like, especially starting that young, you just have no idea.
Right. Like your perception of reality is just completely
skewed.
Yeah.
Well, totally. And oftentimes, like what the parents, like the symptoms they fake, you know, then doctors will give you medication since you don't need those medications. Usually then that ends up what makes you sick. And you're kind of like, see, you are sick. Like you need this. Or parents can do certain things where they end up like poisoning their kids. There was one story. The lady's name was Lacey Spears. She had a young son. I think his name was Garnet or Garrett. I'll look that up real quick. But like how she ended up kind of like poisoning her son was through high levels of sodium. His name's Garnet. So yeah, it's sodium. Like, yeah, there was just tons and tons of sodium, which basically, and the child did end up passing away. But yeah, it's either these parents will kind of self-poison their children, or they'll kind of manipulate the system to get medications and pills that do end up poisoning their child.
Right. Right. Well, and that's what I think even Gypsy Rose talked about in the documentary, like how much better she felt after she stopped taking all of those medications, because they weren't supposed to be like, she shouldn't have been taking them, one, and they were making her feel more sick than they were helping, because nothing was wrong with her. And she had a bunch of different diagnoses like that they attached to her. I can't even remember all of them, but
she gave a huge list.
Oh, sorry. Well, and then the drugs that she's taking are obviously like very heavy painkillers or whatever. Like there's a bunch of things that she was taking, right? I was gonna say, I was gonna finish the story for our listeners, but I have another case that I want to like talk to you guys about. But anyway, so Dee Dee like completely manipulated this poor girl's like reality and said she had a bunch of diseases. And then in the end, do we want to ruin the end? I don't know.
I mean, you find out pretty early on, so I don't really feel like it ruined, because it's really the story itself that's interesting. I don't even feel like, I mean, even if you Googled it, you would know what happened. So I think it's fine.
Tell them what happened, Nicole.
Spill the tea.
Spill the tea. Anyway, so Gypsy ended up meeting this guy or this boy, because how old are they? 15, 14?
Well, that was the other thing, though. Actually, she like wasn't actually 15, which that was like, whoa, weird to me.
Yeah. So the mom was also lying to Gypsy about her age. So she was telling her that she was actually a decade younger than she actually was. Anyways, there's so many issues.
I know.
But anyway, so she ended up meeting this guy online and they made this elaborate plan, and she ended up opening up to him and telling him how she felt. I mean, at some point she also realized like, this is not okay. Like, this is not how it should be. She ended up opening up to the guy, and like, long story short, like he ended up killing her.
Yeah, like she asked him.
Yeah, she asked him to kill her. And so I don't even know, the guy is like on death row or something, right?
Is he?
I don't know. No, I think he's like doing life sentence, but I know that Gypsy is getting out, right?
I think she's up for probation.
Right.
In 2 years?
Yeah, I think in like a couple years, because it was 2016, she was charged with second-degree murder for what happened to her mom.
Right.
And it was 8 years after something that she was going to be up for parole or something.
Yeah, I think
Right.
that sounds right. Because I think I remember doing the math whenever I watched the documentary of trying to figure out when she was out for parole, and then it being in a couple of years.
Yeah. I could pull up the messages. Like, Carly was like, oh my God, she's getting out.
I know that's, it's like, I kind of feel bad because it's like, I mean, she was a victim in all of this for sure.
Right.
And so, but I'm also just thinking like, she also went through some pretty severe trauma for the first 20 years of her life, and then was in prison, which is notoriously not super helpful usually with the trauma. So I'm just, I don't know. I hope that she's doing great, and I hope that she does great whenever she's out.
I know. I hope she got the mental health help that she needed.
Yeah. It was even crazy though to like watch her talk in that documentary and just like see, I feel like even then she just seemed so much better. I don't know. I mean, there was definitely some things, but
I feel like there's also a huge difference in like before she would have this like very like baby voice. And like towards the end, like then when she was like talking to her father, like you could tell it changed where she's kind of like almost breaking that mold of like, I'm not this child. I don't have to play small anymore.
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if finding out her real age also like helped her shift her mentality. I was gonna say something. It doesn't matter. Maybe it'll come back to me. But anyways, so Jazz, you told us about the case that you were looking into, and whatever ended up happening, because I had heard that she was like injecting her son's bloodstream with salt. Right?
Yeah. So this, and one thing I noticed with this mom and with Dee Dee is there's always something that happened. Like these moms have like done other things before, like they had children, if that makes sense. The mom I'm talking about, her name is Lacey Spears. So people were just saying that she was just kind of always off, like as a person, like before she ever had a kid, she used to be around like a lot of other people's kids and involved in her church. And it just kind of came about that people were just saying like she would lie a lot or act like kids were hers that like weren't hers. And I know like in the documentary with Dee Dee, I remember her parents talking about Dee Dee being like, Dee Dee's always been kind of strange. Like she, even with her own mom, they had said like at the end of her mom's life, she withheld food from her and like she didn't really want to take care of her. So it seems like these people, you know, before they turn into this role, there's other things going on, like we mentioned. But yeah, with Lacey Spears, so she had her son, Garnet, and with him, yeah, that's what it was. They end up finding, so she went in quite a few times about being like, my son's sick. He has these, you know, like high fevers. They would test him. And I want to pull up the levels that they said that should be normal versus what they found in the son. But while I'm doing that, I'll keep talking. So the son ended up being sick. They had to put a feeding tube in the son because he couldn't keep food down. He was constantly throwing up. It was years later, the son was still on feeding tubes, and a doctor was like, this is not normal. Like, what is the need for your son on these feeding tube? Why is he on these feeding bags? And, you know, again, the girl went to the doctor, and the nurses were becoming suspicious of her because at one point, the son was there and they're like, okay, well, he's fine. She takes him into the bathroom. He comes out. The son immediately is ill. And they get suspicious. They have cameras that see her go into the bathroom a second time. The son's ill. And that's kind of what they use to say, we think that the mother is poisoning the son with sodium because the sodium levels are way higher than they should be for someone that age. And there's no reason within a short time frame that all of a sudden where is this intake coming from? They do an investigation at her home, and she has basically from the feeding tube, she kind of has like these feeding bags. At first, that evidence is completely missed. And later on, they find it and test it. And there is sodium, salt. And they notice with all of his medicines, hidden behind it is just like a big can of salt. And to me, it was crazy because, I mean, obviously you hear like high sodium diets aren't good for you, but I didn't realize like salt, I mean, can poison you to the fact that you die. And
Right.
so, and even when she was convicted, she was just still like, I didn't do it. I love my son. Like no level of it was me like ever from her.
That's crazy. The case that I was going to talk about is similar to that, but I remembered in the middle of you talking what I was going to say before, that the sad part, I'm just going to jump back, that the sad part about Dee Dee, or like her daughter Gypsy, is that she actually preferred her mother dead. Like she preferred being in prison than like having to go one more day with her mother, which is heartbreaking. But I mean, heartbreaking for her as a person, right?
Right.
That was her experience of a mother.
Right. For like 20 years.
I know.
Yeah. And that's how she felt. Like first she was like, there was no way out unless my mother was dead. And she had some remorse where she was like, well, I wanted her dead, but not dead. But I mean, I couldn't do this anymore. And I honestly, I mean, I don't feel like her mother would have stopped, you know, especially with the lying about her being in a wheelchair. I'm sure she would have acted like, oh, well, she's going to have to be in my care forever. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know. I feel like with a lot of these cases are not really good outcomes for the victims.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's why it's such an important conversation, because I don't know. I mean, it's such a good thing to be aware of that this can happen, especially if you're in an area or a field that can notice these things and report these things, and just be aware that this can happen. I mean, I obviously know that this is rare-ish. You know, I know that this isn't like a super common occurrence, but it's still just, I mean, these are still kids that have no idea what this, I mean, it's child abuse, and the way that this is kids who are vulnerable already, having no idea what's happening to them and with no power really to stop it. And so just being aware of it. And that's, I told Nicole that it's such a hard thing to talk about. And I always kind of have this struggle of talking about mental illnesses, because it's never like I want to glamorize an illness, right? Like I never want to talk about it and be like, oh, this one's really cool, like necessarily, because it's like, well, it's a mental illness, like it's horrible and it's hard. But I also think that on the other hand, this is important to talk about, because it is important to notice like those signs and know that like, just because, you know, mom's taking care of them, quote unquote, does not always mean that that's a good idea. That does not always mean that mom is the best thing for them. And I know that that's a sad reality sometimes, but in Gypsy Rose's case, you know, saying she felt more free basically in prison than living with her mom, like, then it's important to note what that feels like for those kiddos.
Yeah. It's the classic, see something, say something.
Right.
There was like a girl who had said that, I guess she was kind of friends with Gypsy Rose, but those were kind of some signs where she was like, I could only hang out with her, you know, if her mom was there, like, and we couldn't really talk about anything. Like it was very like, okay, if something's off with that relationship, like what's happening. And it was hard for doctors to catch, because a lot of times, like as soon as these people notice a doctor's catching on, they'll switch doctors and they'll switch and they'll switch. And that happened with Gypsy Rose, because one of the disorders that her mom was saying was the muscular dystrophy, like Nicole was saying. And a doctor had noted, okay, for someone allegedly having muscular dystrophy, her muscles haven't atrophied. Like, sure, they're not, you know, as muscular, but they're nowhere near her having that disorder. And then he made that note, like possible Munchausen's by proxy. But then, of course, boom, they're on to a new doctor. And obviously, doctors don't know where their patients are going to, new doctors and new buildings. So there's not correlation and conversations between medical histories.
Right. Well, and that was so smart how she even figured that out too, because she had access to Gypsy Rose's medical records, because Gypsy Rose was technically still her child, which I'm even wondering, like at her actual age, I wonder if that's why she lied about her actual age, because after a certain age, unless she had guardianship, she wouldn't have access to her medical records. And so, but she got access to those medical records and saw that doctor was thinking it might be Munchausen's by proxy. And that was whenever she like ran and found a new doctor. And so she was, I mean, it's brilliant. And it's so sad that brilliance is put towards something like this, because like, you're so smart.
Wasted energy.
Right.
Yeah. It's really sad. I mean, I think, like you guys said, like there's maybe not communication between like previous, medical providers with current ones or whatever, or like you, like as a person, have a lot of control over that, of how much you're sharing of your medical history, which makes it so easy for, these people to get away with it that easily.
Yeah.
But I mean, you look at these cases, like the one that I did research that I want to tell you guys about, and I'm just like, how did she get away with it? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about your case?
Yeah. So I was going to like say it right after Jazz, because it has a lot of similarities. I mean, I'm sure that all of these do. But so my case is about Olivia Gant, and she was the daughter. And so I'm not really sure how it began, but basically like her mother, Kelly Turner Grant, had taken her to like the Children's Hospital in Colorado. And she said that she had severe constipation, which the mother, I think, induced with certain medication. And so, like they treated her, and she ended up going home. But then after that, like the mother would claim that she was just not consuming food the way she was supposed to, or she was kept dealing with constipation. And so like she kept, I don't know, what's the word? Oh my God, why does this happen?
It's the pressure.
I was gonna say it's the mom brain. All your gray matter hasn't come back yet.
No, it's just when you're supposed to explain something and you forget the word. Anyways, she basically was just like lying to the doctors about what was really happening. So she was obviously like manipulating, like she was giving her daughter all these medications. So she was obviously constipated, and she was very, very small. Like she was like 2 or 3 years old. And she was having like these like heavy like narcotics or whatever. But anyway, she like somehow convinced the doctors to give, that's the word that I was trying to come up with, like convinced. She was trying to convince the doctors to basically like put her on feeding tubes. And there was even like a surgery where she got her small intestine being rerouted through her large intestine, and was taking food from a bag affixed to her stomach. So she was not really eating. She was just getting like fed through like the feeding bag. And then at some point she had like 3 different types of feeding tubes surgically implanted at different points. So, and then on top of that, she was like on anti-seizure medication. So she somehow convinced the doctors that she was also having seizures, although like none of them saw it, like saw her having a seizure. So this article also said that she, for like a 5-year period, so this started when she was very small, and she ended up dying at 8 years old. But for like a 5-year period, she was under heavy narcotic drugs, and supposedly like had 1,000 documented hospital visits.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways, so also like as many people who suffer from Munchausen by proxy, she like loved the sympathy and attention. And so what she would do was she would like post Olivia's like bucket list, and have all these charities, kind of like provide, like different items on the bucket list, like take her to Disneyland, have like a themed party, or like, I think there was also a time when she went like in the firefighter truck. But it's estimated or like believed that the mother scammed over like $500,000 out of like charity organizations and like other individuals. Wow. Yeah. So what ended up happening is that at some point, like the mom tried to get a do not resuscitate order from doctors. And so they all kept refusing her. So she kept switching doctors until one of them finally gave it to her. And then she basically put her daughter in hospice and like convinced the doctors to take out the feeding tube. So basically Olivia started starving, and that's how she ended up dying. She was starving in hospice.
It's so terrible. I can't even fathom like because of course all the cases we've talked about has been with mothers and their children. I can't even fathom as a mother, like you knowingly putting your children through constant pain or these surgeries and no level of just, there's no right or wrong to them. It's just, they want to push it further and further.
Mm-hmm. Or even like remorse. I wonder if they experience any remorse or guilt over those actions of just seeing their kids in so much pain. I mean, just like even surgeries are traumatic for kids, right? Like, I mean, that's something that they don't fully understand yet. You're being cut open and there's something inside of you and that's scary. And so I'm just thinking about all of the different separate traumas and involved in like, in this like, years span of trauma. And I don't know, like, I don't understand how, I mean, I guess just not having that remorse or guilt, which then is just like, makes you think of a whole bunch of other disorders where it's like, you're a psychopath. Like,
yeah.
How can you not feel guilty about it? I don't know. And I think, so I don't know. I guess I told y'all that, with Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose, I could kind of understand-ish like where she was coming from and maybe like some of the emotional rewards she was getting from that, along with like the external like financial benefit. But the case that I read up on was actually, I kind of liked it because it did stump me more because I just really didn't understand any part of it. And I mean, obviously I'm no expert in Munchausen's by proxy, but this one was really odd to me. And it's one that I think is like one of the older ones that people have known about. But Mary Beth Tinning, I don't know if y'all saw her whenever you were researching, but Mary Beth Tinning had 9 children.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. First. And
First of all,
like, I would say she's a saint, but alas, none of them survived, so not saintly. And I feel like this one really puzzled me because none of them made it past the age of 4, I think. And so it's just, I mean, it's not even, you're not even getting the benefit of feeling needed by your child and getting to spend more time with your child and getting the external benefits of it. It's just, they just die. And so she kept taking in her kids, and it was the same thing kind of as what y'all talked about. Like, she would take in her kids to the emergency room and claim that they had seizures, claim that they had had cardiac arrest. And they would find nothing wrong. And then they would send her home and then they would be dead, like, shortly after, and no one could explain why. And I think I don't remember, it was like after 6 of them had died, they finally started saying like, okay, well, it's sudden infant death syndrome, which I'm also just like, how are we feeling like one woman has 6 kids with SIDS?
Yeah.
I don't know. That to me doesn't
it's
make
like
sense.
time again and again and again, and no one questioning, no one stepping in.
Right. I know, exactly. So to be fair, I still don't even feel like that really makes it fair. This was in the 1960s, late 1960s into the 1970s. And so I don't know if there just maybe wasn't as much awareness over Munchausen's by proxy, or I don't know. I still don't really quite understand how you can, if you've seen this medical chart, how you can think that 6 of her kids have died of SIDS. So whenever she was asked about, like, she got called that she had like the death gene in her family. And so people were asking her why she continued to have kids. And she just said that this is what a woman is supposed to do, which I feel like even that tells you a lot about maybe like if she just felt like, well, I'm a woman, so I should be having children, but then she actually didn't want to have children and she wasn't wanting to be a mother. And so she kind of felt like this was her out. Like, oh, look, I had kids and they just didn't survive, so then I'm done now. I don't know. I still don't quite understand her thought process there. But basically, so her last child of the 9 was the one that she was finally charged with murder for and sentenced, and is still in prison. She's been denied parole twice. But she admitted in prison to have smothering 2 of her other children. She was charged with smothering her youngest child and it's believed that she smothered all of them or killed all of them in some way, but she's only admitted to the 3. But I feel like even the crazier part is that she wants to be taking care of people in prison. She wants to be like taking care of the ill in prison, which I think maybe that is part of her thought process. Like, I think she likes maybe that aspect of it, of like caring for someone. I still don't understand why that would stop at the age of 4 though. Like, why wouldn't you want, if that's something you do enjoy, why wouldn't this be like a Munchausen's by proxy case like Dee Dee, where it's like you continue to care for that person throughout their life? I still can't really wrap my mind around that one.
Yeah.
Especially like in prison, because then obviously in prison it's like people, like all adults, like you're in your not age group,
right.
but I mean adults are with adults, kids are like where they are. But it's like, okay, with you and your kids, it's like, okay, there must be something where it's like, oh, they're getting to an age of maturity. Not that like 5 is mature, but it's like, where it's like, oh, you're past an age where it's like, yeah, okay, you want to take care of people in prison. That's so out of your age group of what you're trying to do. Like, I just feel like she wants that, just a younger, like, I feel like when you're that old, you don't know what's going on. You're not really fighting back. You're not questioning things. And I feel like with an adult, if she tried to pull that move, I think there's a lot more cognizance of what's going on.
Right. And I mean, like you said, if it's more directed at toddlers, and then you can kind of grow out of that stage, then you're not with anyone under the age of 18 in prison. You know what I mean? So it's not even like you can take care of someone else's kids and kind of feel motherly about it. Like, you're taking care of adults. And so I don't, like, it's a caretaking feeling, but it's not the same as caretaking for a child, your child especially. I don't understand.
Yeah. Like I said, it's hard when you can't, well, I mean, it's a good thing that we can't get it. I mean,
right.
It's not a bad thing, but it is hard where you're like, I can't even try to see where they're coming from, or what is the thought process, or is there no thought process? It's just an instinct inside of, I'm going to do this for this long and I need this outcome to happen.
Yeah. I would really want to know that thought process. Like, what's the thought process of Dee Dee Blanchard? Like, what is she, like, is she saying like, this is the long game? This is like, I'm doing this, I'm in this? Or do you think it is like one small decision at a time, where she's just like, okay, not quite ready today for her to like be okay?
I think it also has to be like a conscious decision, since you start like, okay, this is, because you can't go back after so many years of lying, like of claiming that your daughter had leukemia and she can't walk, and a number of other things that I can't even remember right now. Like, you can't go back. Like, you have to be committed to it.
Yeah.
When she even like, I don't know how many times it was. I know at least once, like the mom had even like moved her and Gypsy like to a different state because like she was feeling like people were onto her, and she didn't really even want Gypsy's father around Gypsy. And
yeah, which that's true, because it's one of those things where it's like, you wonder if she felt trapped maybe in the decision, and she just felt like she had no way out. But I do feel like if you're moving to a different state, you could start over. Granted, your mental illness doesn't just go away because you move to a different state. Like, that's obviously, you're not going to just start making healthy decisions probably. But hard to understand.
Yeah, you guys were saying right now how you wish, I mean, it would be nice to know what the thoughts are to like better understand, because it's so hard for us. And then it reminded me that after the documentary, I like texted you guys and I was like, oh, I had an interesting thought, but I'll save it.
Oh yeah.
But it's along those lines. I think it would be interesting, which I don't even know, but
Leon thinks it'd be interesting too.
I don't know what's happening over there. I think it would be interesting to have like a simulation for mental disorders, like different ones, to be able to put yourself in that position. I don't even know how this would be done, but like have these like the thoughts that would be happening to these women with Munchausen by proxy happening to you, and then like have that understanding.
Whoa. That's trippy to think about. Because then it's even like, if you could do that, what would it be like to go back to your regular thought process after that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Like, could you start to separate that? Or it's like, because every like Black Mirror episode ever, where it's like you do something too much, it affects you.
Yeah. Yes, this is definitely a Black Mirror episode concept.
I think you need time to recover. Even watching that documentary, it's like what, an hour and a half, and the whole day I was just like,
oh, I know. I was watching it on my lunch break and I was eating and I was like, I don't even really want to eat. Yeah. So it would be I feel like it would be interesting to understand the thought process, but I also would be like a little bit scared of what that would do to my brain, what that would do to my thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, I would need proof that it would go away and that I could separate them.
And it's hard because it's like, you know, it'd be so like, you know, it's like good research, and that's the thing where it's like, there's not actually like a cure or anything to actually really do about Munchausen's by proxy. I mean, basically it's like, I think there's like different terms for different states, but I know like CYFD is one here, but like any child protective service and like pretty much that, and the cops intervene. But I mean, there's nothing besides just removing the child from that situation to do, which is just, it's wild because I don't know, it's just hard when it's not like oh, well, we can do this and do that. They're kind of just saying, separate the child from that person. I mean, like basically forever. It's not well, that person can get help and they can be around them again. They're like, no.
Right. Well, and even if they're caught, I mean, then you are charged with child abuse and you go to prison, you know, if they can prove it. And so, I mean, I guess that's probably not every case. I would hope that some are caught earlier than it becoming really severe. But I think that that's such a tricky thing to even notice before it gets severe.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it is hard for them to like actually get help versus just going to prison or dying, being killed by your daughter. It's not funny.
When you laugh because it's not funny, but you're uncomfortable. That's what it was.
This is why we're always laughing.
It is why I'm always laughing.
What was I going to say? Well, this is why this conversation is important, right? Because I think that I think just being aware that it exists, and then if something catches you like the wrong way, like if you know of a kid that always seems sick, then maybe you can kind of keep track of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take some notes, call in a wellness check.
Mm-hmm.
There's no harm in trying to just doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah. Saying something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyways, Jazz, you finished Sharp Objects, right? I
did. I finished it.
And spoiler alert for everyone who hasn't watched it, it has to do with this episode.
Yeah. That's how I got into it. I was super obsessed with Sharp Objects, and it's part of the story.
Well, that's interesting too, though, because so even the character who was the victim of Munchausen's by proxy had kind of that like baby-ish like personality, like part of her
with her mom.
And so I feel like that's because it's kind of like Gypsy Rose. Like Gypsy Rose, I think, had like this like small child, like small, vulnerable, weak child being taken care of, and then she kind of got to come out of that whenever her mom was killed. And so it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that with Sharp Objects before.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how recently you guys saw it. I've watched this show like 4 times. 2 things though. Actually, I just thought about it. But remember, there's a part where Camille, which is Amy Adams, she asks like her younger sister, which is like the victim of Munchausen by proxy. Like they have, their mom who has it. She at some point, remember that the mom, like she had finally somehow convinced Camille to like start taking like her medicine. So the mom was obviously like poisoning her daughters, and Camille would ask her like, why do you let her? And then she was like, oh, well, she just likes to take care of me.
Yeah, I think they were sitting around like the dinner table or something, or maybe it was right after that scene. But yeah, she was like, basically it was like the attention, like, oh, the doting mother, like then I get this attention. And I kind of felt like the daughter needed that, because then the daughter, I feel like out in the city was kind of known as this like, oh, she's like the rebellious girl, and like, you know, she's out there, and the cops were kind of always like watching her, and
she's
so
out there.
So I feel like it's that thing where she was kind of someone who like wanted that type of attention, like even though she knew like it was hurting her, she was still like, well, you know, at least my mom will be paying attention to me then.
Yeah, well, like she would purposely, sorry.
No, you go.
I was gonna say, well, she would purposely like binge drink to get super like messed up and, you know, have a hangover for her mom to take care of her. I think, yeah, that daughter, because she was like the third daughter, right? She and the mom had like this weird like dynamic where they needed each other, right?
Yeah. Well, and even just thinking about like the association between being sick and feeling loved, like if you were feeling unloved and you were seeking love, then you would want to be sick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like with the binge drinking and like, or with her mom taking care of her, if that was how she felt loved, because that's how her mom had shown her love, then that does make sense that she would want to be in that situation almost, or put herself like by the binge drinking.
This random thought occurred to me because at some point, sorry, I'm like remembering the show, but at some point, the youngest daughter, what's her name? Emma. Okay. She also says that one of them, the one that ended up passing away, was like, oh, she was perfect, wasn't she? And I think that she aspired to be like perfect, right? Because the mom would consider the daughter that had passed like perfect. So maybe she was also like seeking that validation from her mom, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, so you know what I realized that I recently watched it? Do you know who Camille's roommate is in the psych ward?
No.
Oh, yes. Euphoria.
Who is it from Euphoria?
Sydney.
Oh, that's the daughter, right?
No, that's the roommate, like Camille's roommate.
Oh, I thought that she was the younger daughter. Why am I remembering it that way? I knew she was in it.
Really? I didn't even notice until like this last time that I watched it.
Yeah. Since I just watched it last week, I was like, oh my gosh, it's her. Like, she's so young.
Right? Yeah.
Side note, Jazz, she's in Albuquerque right now. You should
hunt her down. I'm like, big fan.
Yeah, she's filming with Halsey, National Anthem, which I'm just like, okay, so maybe I make a trip to Albuquerque and just drive around and nobody see them.
It's so crazy because the movie industry has like boomed so much where it's like they're filming like everywhere, but I'm always like, how have I never ran into anybody when everyone is always here now?
Right. Because they're not at your house.
That's what's wrong.
This is what's wrong. So go watch Sharp Objects, go watch Mommy Dead and Dearest, and then watch something really lighthearted.
Ease yourself into a Disney movie or something. Right. Oh, I did want to mention from last week, I wasn't sticking my foot in my mouth. I did look up Eminem and Munchausen by proxy. So it wasn't, it's never been like confirmed, and his mom denied it. But if you listen to Eminem's song, Cleaning Out My Closet, came out in 2002, that's where he talks about it.
That song is that old.
Carly was supposed to rap it. Remember? You said that we would start the episode like
closet. That's all I can come up with. Yes, I did say I would wrap it.
Sure, next time.
Sure. Maybe that'll be like a deleted scene.
Create a whole music video.
Right. Oh, that's great. All right. Well, have a good rest of y'all's day. Thanks for listening.